Well, I want to employ a little tool that TV shows use because called the rewind. You watch some television shows and you see them recapping the last episode or the last couple of episodes, so you kind of get in the right frame of mind for what's coming. So I want to rewind with you back to last Sunday, especially if you weren't here, so that because we need to see all that's happened from in the 5th chapter of Mark, from the first verse, to appreciate what's going on in our gospel lesson this morning. So let's begin at the beginning of the first verse of Mark chapter 5. Jesus has been teaching. The crowds have been swarming. They're pushing their friends, their family forward who need healing. Jesus is teaching the gospel. This is going on all day long. Jesus gets tired. He gets worn out. It's dusk, the calm of the evening, and he suggests, let's go to the other side and take the gospel there. They get in the boat, a small open boat. All 13 of them, the 12 disciples and Jesus. In the middle of the Sea of Galilee, going from the western shore to the eastern shore, as the sea is known to have happened on occasions because of the geography and the terrain around it, a sudden violent storm literally erupts. Hurricane force winds. Huge waves are battering the boat and beating it up and swamping the boat. And they literally are in a life and death set of circumstances. The disciples panic at the peril, and they're filled with terror. And Jesus just sleeping in the back of the boat. And they're so terrified that they go to the back of the boat and they start shaking Jesus. Because you don't think if you're terrified, you're going, Jesus, could you wake up now? Jesus, wake up! Don't you care if we die? Jesus, now awake, stands up. He speaks to the storm and the waves and the wind. Be still. Immediately, it's calm. By the way, whenever you read the Gospel of Mark, pay attention to wherever he uses the word immediately. He loves to use that word, describing the power of Jesus as God. Because that's his intent in the gospel writer's intent, is to help you see that Jesus, the man, is the Son of God. But immediately, as he said, be still, the storm stills, the waves stop. It's as smooth as glass. With a word, he stops a storm. The disciples are wowed with wonder. Who is this Jesus that even the wind and the waves obey him? Now, while the text, not in Mark or Luke or in Matthew, who record these events, tell us what happens next, but if you were 13 guys in a small open boat that was swamping, and the storm has been stilled, and you're still going to head east, you imagine they started bailing the water out of the boat, and they set sail again, and they head for the eastern shore. Do you know what the very first person they meet is? A demon-possessed man. He's inhabited by somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 demons, all in one guy. They give him what appears to be superhuman strength. Nobody can stop him. Nobody can tie him up. He's living naked in the cemetery. And he's known for running around shrieking, well, you would be too if 6,000 demons were torturing you in your spirit constantly. He was known to cut himself. He's trying to get free from the torture of his soul. He's trapped. He can't change it. But he sees Jesus and the disciples pulling up in their boat. And he notices the demons are terrified. So he starts running to Jesus for help. Now I want you to see all these events through the eyes and ears of the disciples. They have just come through this facing their own death experience, literally in the boat. Just a couple hours later, they're on the shore, and the very first person they meet, because Jesus wanted to bring the gospel to the eastern shore there, is a man filled with demons screaming at him and running towards him. And Jesus, when the man gets to the boat, says, what's your name? But he doesn't answer. The demons do. We are legion, for we are many. I just imagine the smirk that they formed in the man's face. See what you can do, Jesus. We're a lot in here. Jesus, with a simple word, commands them to come out of the man. And immediately they leave him, but they go into pigs. And apparently, if you do the math, there's 2,000 pigs that die as they leave, so that apparently only 3 demons fit in a pig. That's the math. I didn't make that up. That's what's in the text. And the pigs go screaming off a cliff and into the sea, and they're gone. And the people in that area on the eastern shore were Greeks. They were into all kinds of idol worship over there. And when they saw this farmer lose his whole herd of pigs, because of this one guy being set free, they said to Jesus, thinking about their own livelihood, Jesus, I think it's time for you and your disciples to leave. So Jesus and the disciples get back in the boat. They go back across the Sea of Galilee, and they land back on the western shore. All this has happened in less than 24 hours. And when they get and land back on the western shore, the crowd that they had left to get away from just hours before is still there waiting for him to show up again. You imagine how excited they were. Oh, goody, goody, Jesus is back. And the disciples going, oh boy, the crowd's still here. But in the crowd is one man. His name is Jairus. He's a VIP among the Jews. He's one of the few rulers of the Sanhedrin. That's the ruling council over all of the Jews. But he's also a follower of Jesus. And seeing Jesus, he runs to Jesus and falls on his knees before Jesus. Please, Jesus, come, help save my one and only daughter. She's only 12 years old. She's the center of my life. What will I do without her? Please, come, help, save. Lay your hands on her and heal her. Again, appreciate from the point of view of the disciples what they're going through, what they're experiencing in terms of fear. Their own life, about to lose it in the boat, and there's nowhere to go. There's no running away from it, and they're panicked and filled with terror. The second thing that they encounter as soon as they get on the shore is a demon-possessed man with 6,000 demons in him, running at them, shrieking loudly and wailing. Then they are rejected by the people there and told to go away. And when they get back, the crowd that wore them out is still there. And there's a man pleading for the life of his only daughter. If you think about what Jairus is going through, think what the disciples are going through, you have to feel the pathos of what's in Mark 5 to understand what's going on. Imagine how the disciples are torn in their heart. Seeing Jesus, Jairus, the ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, and kneeling before him, earnestly pleaded with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come to my house and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. Let me ask you a question. You see, because what we are afraid of often gets the best of us, doesn't it? At least in the moment that the fear is welling up. It's easy to get stuck in our fears too, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for something to happen. And our fears don't even need to be real, do they? As long as they feel real to us, it makes no difference. The impact of our fear is just the same. The definition of fear is this, that it's the belief or conviction that someone or something is dangerous, is a threat, and is likely to cause us harm or death and great pain. I don't know if you, those of you who have maybe you caught it or heard it on some internet service, or maybe you actually watched the show, but you've heard of the TV show called The View. You heard of that one? Sherry Shepherd, one of the hosts on that show, made a very startling reveal this week. She said that her husband Lamar and their son Jeffrey the night before were dead asleep in the wee hours of the morning, and their burglar alarm went off. Meh, meh, meh. Intruder alert! Intruder alert! Leave the house right now! It's bad enough to get woke up out of a dead sleep. Imagine your burglar alarm that you set so that you could be safe is now telling you it is no longer safe. Of course, Sherry sends her husband Lamar downstairs with the dog. Andy's got no golf club, he's got no baseball bat, just him and the dog. And so Sherry runs to her son's room because if whoever's there gets past Lamar and the dog, she's got to figure out some way to defend her and her son. And she's looking around for something to defend themselves with. And she says, and all I could find was a wicker basket for the trash. So her big reveal was, she announced to everybody, and if you know anything about the show The View, it has a kind of a liberal left kind of leaning to it. She says, we're getting a gun. It's a dangerous world out there, and we've got to have something, so why swing when you can point a gun and hit somebody with it? Fear can mess with our heads. Fear can freeze us in our tracks. It can get us to and cause us to do things that we know are not good for us, that we ought not to be doing, but we feel like we've got to do because we're afraid. And our fears can keep us from not only doing what needs to be done, but it keeps us from enjoying the full and whole life that God has desired and designed for us to enjoy. So what are you afraid of? What stops you in your tracks and immobilizes you? My mom, who I dearly love, has always said, as far back as I can remember, I will never fly in an airplane. I'm afraid of flying. I don't know why. It's absolutely irrational. She's never been on a plane. She's never been in a plane crash. She's got no reason to be afraid of flying, but she's in her 80s and she's never getting on a plane. She says, you can try after I'm gone, but I'm not too sure you're going to be successful at that either. What about you? What are you afraid of? It's said that 95% of the things we worry about never happen. Have you heard that statistic? Most of the things we worry about, it's just never going to happen. But what happens when your worst fear is realized and you have to live it? That's where Jairus is in our text. Because as he successfully found Jesus, his daughter is dying, and he's got Jesus to say, yes, we're coming, and he's still talking as they're moving towards his house. And then word comes from his house. Don't bother Jesus anymore. Your daughter's dead. Can you imagine being Jairus? How would that feel if you got that kind? You desperately come to the one you know can help. He's agreed to come and help. And now you get word that the help that you believed that he was going to come and do, make her better, is now impossible. He'd gone from desperate to despair. Had to have been crushed. If we were there standing with him, he might have gone gray as a ghost. What's the phrase? Gray as a ghost. Just all the color drained out of him. I remember one person describing their grief to me years ago. They said, this grief, it's like a tidal wave about 50 feet high. And I'm expending all of my energy trying to hold that back because I am absolutely convinced that if I let that grief, that feeling that's all tied into my loss, if I let myself feel that, I'm going to drown in it and I'm going to die. That's where Jairus is. We find our fear, whatever that fear is. And by the way, I went on the internet and there's one site that claimed to have all the listed named fears on their website. Almost 600 of them. They're all big, long names. There's probably one for that. Fear of fears with long names. Some of us fear the known. Some of us fear that we hope it doesn't catch up with us. Some of us fear the unknown of what might happen. What I do know is that our fears have multiplied since Adam and Eve first sinned. And we couldn't we didn't think we could trust God anymore. And we believed that we needed to be in control. We needed to be in charge. And when we're afraid, that's really the question we need to ask. Who are we relying on? Who do we want to be in control in this moment? And who can we trust? See, when we're feeling threatened, when we're feeling danger, we want some lever, some strength, some ability, some opportunity to overcome what we feel is going to do us harm. I mean, let's be honest. That's why we're fearful. Because while we may go through life trying to arrange the whole world, because the world would be a better place if it just do what I told it to do, right? And if everything always went my way. That's original sin, isn't it? Always wanted to be the one in control. It's when we feel out of control and our circumstances are beyond our ability to change. Again, whether it's real or imagined, and we feel fear. That's where Jairus was living. And Mark tells us, ignoring what they said, Jesus said to Jairus, stop being afraid and keep on believing, because your daughter will be healed. In essence, Jesus said to Jairus, nothing's changed by this announcement. Trust me. I said I would heal her, and I'm going to heal her. Trust me. Not yourself, not something else. St. Paul reminds us in his letter to the Colossians in the very first chapter about Jesus. He says, everything was created by him and for him, and in him everything continues to hold together. Trust this Jesus who has the power to speak a word, and he restores life. Trust this Jesus who has the power to speak a word, and immediately a storm is stilled. Trust me, Jesus said. I have the authority to speak a word, and the disease is banished. Trust me. I have the power to speak a word, and 6,000 demons flee out of a man. And trust Jesus not simply because he has the power and ability that we don't have, but because his love for us is great and unconditional and enormous. We want control, that's why we fear when we don't have it, so that we can determine the outcome thinking we know what's always good and right and best, and we don't. But God does, as he sees the whole distance to eternity. The one who can do all things and knows all things, even when even when our worst fears are realized, even if the thing itself happens that we're most afraid of happening, it changes nothing about our eternal outcome or what God can do. When Jesus arrived by Jairus' house, there were a great crowd of people wailing and moaning and grieving. And you might think, well, boy, they took it pretty hard. You have to understand in those days and in that culture that even the poorest of Jews felt it unconscionable not to hire at least 2 lute players or pipers and 1 woman who knew how to wail and scream really loud. And the rationale was because, again, in that culture, they didn't take a couple of days to do the funeral and their grieving. They did it all in 24 hours. Now, they grieved afterwards, but the funeral process took less than a day, usually, or at most a day. And so to help in that process, you would hire people who could let all their feelings out and put on a good show that would help people feel comfortable and letting out everything that they're feeling in the inside because of their grief. And even a poor person was said to get at least 2 pipers and 1 woman. But so here they have, and they're doing a great job. I mean, there's a great commotion. They're just all wailing and moaning. And when Jesus saw the commotion of the flute players and the noisy crowd with the people crying and wailing and mourning loudly for Jairus' daughter, They didn't believe because they didn't believe Jesus. I mean, Jesus says, what do you weep? Why you be quiet. She's not dead. She's sleeping. And you know what our text tells us? In the original Greek, it says that they laughed at Jesus derisively. You crazy lunatic nut. Everybody knows she's dead. What do you mean she's sleeping? What do you think we are, a bunch of stupid people? Jesus, look at, what do you know? So Jesus kicks them all out. You all get out. Mom and Dad get to go in. Peter, James, and John, who he took with him, get to go in. And then they went into where the child was, and Jesus took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, or kumi, depending on which translation you read, which simply means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And Jesus speaks a word, and immediately she lives. And not is she just alive again, but her disease or her sickness, whatever it was, because we're never told, is gone. And immediately again, because Mark loves that word, her parents are just, well, you look at that, she's alive. And she's just walking around like any 12-year-old would, like nothing happened. Make sure you feed her, Jesus says. Think about the storm at the beginning of the chapter. Facing death itself, personal death, imminent peril, and terror and panic. In a word, the storm stills and they're safe. As soon as they get to the other side on the eastern shore, a man possessed by somewhere between 3,000 and 6,000 demons comes screaming, yelling towards them that nobody could bind or hold or even keep him safe for himself, running naked at them, screaming and shouting. In a word, the demons leave immediately. And when they come back to the western shore and they meet up with Jairus and they go back to his house, Jesus speaks a word and his daughter lives. John wrote in his first letter in chapter 4, verse 18, that perfect love drives out or casts out fear. Not how strong our love is, but how great God's love is for us. Knowing how much God loves us casts out fear. So David in his 23rd Psalm says, you know the words, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, what? I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, that's the strength of God. They comfort me. In Hebrews chapter 2, the writer declares, since the children have flesh and blood, Jesus too shared in their humanity so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. St. Paul proclaims in 1 Corinthians 15, lo, I tell you a mystery. Well, not all sleep, but we all will be changed in a flash and a twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised, imperishable, and we will all be changed. Friends, no matter what we're afraid of, no matter why, the reason we're afraid, no matter how out of control we may feel, or desperately want to have the power to be in control, you and I are dearly, eternally, and forever unconditionally loved by God, the God of the universe who speaks, and it is so. If you're going to trust anybody, trust Jesus. For if death must yield and surrender when he speaks a word, if the wind and waves obey him when he speaks a word, then his one word is worth anything and everything that we might have. Guns, bats, golf clubs, whatever we got that we think we need to keep us safe when we're afraid. And now may the peace of God that surpasses all understanding keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus unto life everlasting. Amen.